for more diverse panels instead of more diversity panels. My name is Kelly Strait. Ostensibly, I'm moderating this. I'll let my fellow panelists introduce themselves, and then we will get started.
Hi, I'm Andy Trembley. I have worked on a bunch of conventions. I have chaired one, and my introduction to the programming world was back at 2002 in San Jose. Before 2002 in San Jose, I was tapped to join the program brainstorm team, primarily for costume program related stuff, but I ended up doing a lot of discussion related to programming and programming diversity, and at the time, making sure that diversity related programming wasn't just the that it was actually something that was meaningful discussion that could have focus. So that was the drum that we were beating on back then. Now we're beating on a new drum of we need a broader range of voices on program so that we're not falling into the same rut all the time.
My name is Kris Snyder. I also go by Nchanter. I usually do those in the other order. I'm from the Boston area. I was more or less head of programming for 5 years for a 3,000 to 4,000 person regional convention called Aresia. I also was on program staff and for a minute was the div head for the Dublin 2019 Worldcon, and I've run program for a couple other smaller conventions over the years. I also was a member of the diversity committee at Aresia. I am a non-binary, genderqueer, queer, non-white but white-passing person, which is some of my reasons for being on the diversity committee at Aresia. I have lots of thoughts about how to do programming well and how to integrate voices that have historically been underrepresented within our communities. Yeah.
Right. So, and once again, I'm Kelly Strait. Most recently, I was the programming head for the Utah NASFIC. I've done programming at a variety of other local and regional conventions. I have a fair amount to say on this topic as well, but mostly I think, with the permission of everyone else in the room, would prefer to steer this conversation in do this better, rather than a litigation of how we may have failed to do it in the past.
Yes, I'm here for that.
So, for example, our little description here says, is it, that is, including diversity, more than just including diverse voices on the panels and on the team that creates the panels? Being a yes, no question, I'm going to answer it yes, but then move on to actual answers rather than yes. So ideally, and I'll let you two start with something like, how do we do it? I will offer myself as I don't want to say a scapegoat, but not really a lamb for slaughter either. One of the things that I felt very strongly about for the Utah NASFIC was increasing the diversity of our panelist pool. As a one-woman show, that was probably not done as well as it could have been, right? Where do we go? How do we do this well? When you're working with a fan group that you don't know well, how do you find the groups to reach out to?
And of course, with Utah, you are in a very, very difficult position. First of all, not being local, and second of all, Utah being Utah.
Right, and I walked in late, so
yeah. But I mean, and of course, the one sad thing here is that I no longer go to my remaining local science fiction convention because I go to Punk Rock Bowling instead that weekend. But there last June there was a bit of a kerfuffle where someone who shall remain nameless decided to drag a few other people in, and it's like, oh, we need to. It's exactly the topic of this we need to get more diversity in programming, and we need to get more diversity in the programming leadership and the convention leadership. And it's like, okay, and posted it on something that, or commented that on a post by the program head, who is a 40-ish Latina, and the convention chair is a Mexican American Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah.
It's the I mean, we're in California, we're in the South Bay. We are already majority minority, and while we don't necessarily do the best job of getting the Spanish-speaking Latinx community in, we have a solid participation by people of color in more in our conventions than I've seen in other areas of the country, where it isn't specifically a POC-oriented convention.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have POC-oriented conventions that are starting up and happening, which are pretty damn cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a connection that is going to need to be built in the future. But the answer is yes. It is more than getting more diverse people in convention leadership and program brainstorming and program planning. But it is also better recognizing when there are people, when there are people of color, queer folks, religious minorities already involved in the convention leadership.
That you said. So something that came up for me in a conversation earlier today, when there are municipalities like the Bay Area, like Chicago, like DC, that, like I'm sure in Boston, that have growing POC-oriented conventions, for as one example, right? And that one way that we perhaps as con runners can help do outreach and increase our diversity is by making connections with those communities. That's great. What I personally fear for, and would like to have a conversation about, although we may not be able to have a fruitful one in this particular population, is how do we make those connections? How do we open up those friendships without seeming like we're just trying to poach and saying, okay, that was very cute and sweet of you that you started that thing, but now just come over here and join ours, right? That we were here first, right? That is absolutely not where I want to be, right? We want to be in a mutually supportive relationship, not, oh, I see you're being successful now, so how about you just
And how do we do that without invading their space?
Exactly.
I mean, so the first answer there is be respectful and understand that some of the people from those communities who have possibly attended your convention or other conventions like yours in the past and have not felt welcome aren't going to want to give it another try or a try after that.
Absolutely.
This is something that I talk about, is getting talked about within my communities right now, is before we do more outreach, is we need to make sure that we're doing what we need to clean house at home. In in the Aresia community, I'll straight up call it out. We know that we have some racists amongst the staff that can say some bullshit, and they're not held accountable. And why would people who are often targets of that language want to come and play in our space when we send a message that sort of thing is totally welcome? Because by not sending clear messages that it is unwelcome, we are saying that it is welcome. There is no sort of squishy middle ground here. What you can do for outreach, though, some concrete things is to try and bridge those things, is support conventions that are doing better at that, if they're POC focused or if they're queer focused. If your convention doesn't have a large queer population and you want to expand it without actually asking for anything in return. Play a long game. Support them, buy ads, do support stuff for a few years, and let those relationships grow naturally. When it comes to creating spaces that are going to be more enticing for people from underrepresented communities to come in. It is to help focus and prompt up without, like, and it's a hard line to do, people of those backgrounds who are already in your group. There are usually a few and they get ignored. Listen to what they're saying that they need. Do that. You know, make sure that you are supporting your existing POC panelists. Most of us, even in very white conventions, have a few. You know, listen to their ideas, promote their ideas. But also, when they say they don't want to be on the diversity panel, like, you have Black panelists who are sick of being on Afrofuturism panels, then maybe you don't run an Afrofuturism panel that year because you don't have the body of panelists. Let those panelists be on other things.
And you catch those panelists and say, do you do the, we're thinking about not doing an Afrofuturism panel because we think that y'all might be burnt out on it. Make sure that they know that this is we think this is turned into a token panel, and we want to find out if you agree. And if you agree, we want to find something else. And also say, we don't want to ghettoize any of our panelists in any particular panel ghetto.
But especially for people who are from underrepresented communities.
Oh yeah. But I mean, there are things there. I mean, Kevin gets ghettoized into costume panel a lot, and folks forget that he's a research scientist. There are, it's a, okay, well, get ghettoized into it's like the token gay panel, gays and science fiction, queer, gays and lesbians in science fiction and their issues. It's like, oh my God, just this.
Nobody should be running that panel anymore.
No, that's a decade and some ago.
So,
but also,
one of the,
sorry, I'm gonna say one teeny little thing, and then I'll have you go. At the same time, right? I think we need to be cautious about, by all means, ask, what could we do, you know, to support you? What can we do to be more welcoming? But also not put that emotional and physical labor on our underrepresented communities, right? We need to be there. Right. And we need, right. That's also a line that can be difficult to find. You know, at what point is my asking you questions, even if I don't intend it that way, coming across, or in actuality, making you do the work?
Like, and I can speak to that directly as somebody who's genderqueer. I use they, them pronouns. I often get approached to ask people about it, and like, who don't understand, like, because it's not grammatically correct to them or whatever, over and over and over again. And I don't always want to talk about it. There's Google. Use it. There are other people who are allies. Maybe ask my partners. My partners are both cis. They're happy to answer questions on that. Go to people, you know, it becomes exhausting. And so that is, and I'm using that as an example for when you have members of underrepresented communities in your community, don't always rely on them to find the solutions, especially if you've asked before and you haven't listened. And sometimes sometimes there are reasons that their suggestions don't work for your community, and that's okay, but then you have to acknowledge it and not go back to the same well. Other sort of practical, I've got a few like super practical, like actual like tips here on what to do to help make a more diverse program I want to share now, that have worked well for me and for us, and I would like to see replicated. One of the things that Arisia does that I did also we implemented for the Dublin Worldcon is we have our diversity committee, and Dublin didn't have a diversity committee, so I recruited individual people for this through my networks and through other friends' networks to review all your panel descriptions. And what you're doing that for, and the way I have like a whole system, there are spreadsheets, you break it down by areas, you assign people different things. It's a lot of spreadsheets. It's a great amount of fun for me. Where you have usually between 2 to 4 people review each panel description. And ideally everybody who's are coming from different backgrounds. I make sure that there is always gender diversity on the reviews. So usually at least people of 2 genders reviewing, sometimes more if I have the pool to do that, to make sure that something isn't accidentally misogynistic, right? A lot of the things that cause offense, and when people are like, oh my God, how are they, you know, it hits Twitter, your program schedule goes and Twitter goes, and like, how could they be like running that panel, that language is offensive, you know, somebody's using an ableist slur in there. We had nobody who was part of the disabled community reviewing that, so they didn't pick up on that word. And so you want to try and have your reviewers be from as many cross sections, and you're still going to miss stuff. And you have them review them, and they give feedback, and then somebody on your program staff, or me, you know, looks at those notes, gives those feedback back to the area managers or your program head, however your function says, to rewrite them in a more inclusive way. A really great example that I can give from Dublin is there was a workshop about what a costuming related workshop, giving people different ways to present themselves on stage. It was a movement workshop for costumers. And the description originally said, are you a man who would like to walk like a woman, or vice versa? And we changed that language to say, are you a person who would like to walk like somebody of a different gender, or something like that. I don't remember the exact wording, but right. And that is a way that it was more inclusive. It became inclusive to non-binary people. And it's a simple change that I don't think the person who wrote the description meant to be exclusive. They just didn't have the frame of reference to understand. And great to have a group of people to review your panel descriptions, or review all your publications, right? Like, make sure that your website content, this is a way to try and be more inclusive. And these sort of things, you know, are super, they're small, they seem small, but they actually make a really big impact.
Okay.
We have a question.
It's not a question, it's a comment.
Oh, it's a comment. Okay.
I have processed said comment.
Okay.
We might come back to it.
So another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
Well, it's a comment.
Yes.
It's not a question. We don't have to address comments.
So another sort of, so that's a thing that established committees can, and program teams can work into their workflow. Anybody wants to talk to me afterwards where you put it into your workflow, given your workflow, I'm happy to talk. Where we do it in the Euresia process is different than where we did it in the WorldCom process, because those programming workflows were very, very different. Another sort of to take a step back a little bit is one of the things, this is my personal soapbox, anybody who talks to me this weekend will hear this again, is you need, if you want more diversity and more inclusion at your convention, then you need to prioritize it. It needs to be the thing that you are working on first or second on your list, not fourth or fifth after you've gotten through all the other regular stuff. Sometimes you need to push off other deadlines and other deliverables to make sure that you've addressed these things. Our Dublin's program schedule went out later than we had hoped because we inserted this in, but it made for a better program and it was worth it.
Nchanter, can I jump in on here?
Sure.
So you brought up all of these practical things. I'm going to start by saying I totally endorse all of these practical things. And all of these practical things run up against a problem that is particularly bad for traveling conventions, where you don't, where you have a new team doing it every year of program always running late.
That too.
And this is something but so prioritizing getting program running earlier, because it's not necessarily just, I mean, in addition to feedback from folks who are reviewing content, as you've described, I mean, one of the things I loved for the flaws that happened with San Jose programming, one of the things that I loved being on the program brainstorm team was that we were inside of the program department and got earlier feed of what the program items were. And the brainstorm team did do a lot of the kind of reviewing of language, of focus, of is this a program description that will be attractive to people? But the 2000 Chicago Worldcon was the first time that I moderated, and was the first time that I was on Worldcon program. And that actually came out fairly early, and the program participants, for each program item, they were distributed contact information for the other program participants. And moderators were encouraged to contact their program participants in advance of the convention.
Is that not standard?
You know, I wish it was standard. It doesn't happen anywhere near as often as it should.
Okay.
And of course, in a traveling convention, there's a lot of mid-scale wheel reinventing, because it's different people every year, and they haven't picked up on the last team does. But having the panelists also be able to come back and say, I need a revision to this program item, and it happens early enough that it can get in before anything is printed. I mean, for Chicago, we weren't early enough to have it before it was printed, but it was early enough that we could go into one panel and say, hi, you read this description and we read this title, and we love this title, and we think the description is crap because we think if we do this, then this, you're not going to stay for this panel. So here's what we're going to do. And then we held the panel for the entire hour. That's something that as you build a more broad panel participant pool, a more diverse panel participant pool, that will actually help enhance the program items even more.
Oh yeah, we definitely we had several instances of that for Dublin where people on the panel were like, hey, this thing, and sometimes we, you know, and some of it was about being more inclusive in the description, and some of them weren't, and you know, we had to use our judgment on which to change. But that's I don't know, again, I think that's since I've been doing program, that's been a normal part of the process I've been involved with. But I know everything runs a little bit different.
Some of it could be, well, we know you as programming team think that this description is sexy, but you're not inside of our community. You're not inside this particular subcommunity of science fiction fandom, and we need to tweak this, because if we do this right, it will not only be attractive to people in the in-group, but it'll draw people in from enhances diversity.
Yep. No, I could do a whole panel on how you best practices for writing panel descriptions, right? Like this stuff can get really fun.
But all of that really does tie back
into making a more welcoming and inclusive environment. It's what that is essentially, like, that is boiling down what we're trying to do when we say we want more diverse conventions and more diverse programming, is making it more welcoming and inclusive.
I mean, in most cases when we're running nonprofits, our tax exempt qualifying purpose is making arts and literature more accessible and more approachable and more welcoming to people, and education about that. And doing this is yet another piece of the, how do we satisfy our mission by which we get all these benefits for being tax exempt.
Also including, like, just from, I mean, this might be an old idea, but I'm gonna state it anyways, like having people from differing backgrounds makes stuff more interesting because people are coming from different viewpoints, and also more realistic.
I'm going to pause for 1 second and ask any of our audience members, present or abroad, that have specific questions for the panel. I mean, the three of us could continue to sit up here and talk about how we've done this, but I would like to be useful to the extent that we can be, rather than speaking in generalities.
Pick one.
What are some strategies? You have to go to the microphone.
Oh, because we are streaming. We are streaming, so you if you're not at the microphone.
What are some strategies that you have that really work for data collection for potential panelists and panelists so that you know these things about them that they might not necessarily say in a bio, like I happen to be fill in the blank, ethnicity, sexual minority, disability?
Ask directly. So seriously, for Dublin, our questionnaire asked for, and it was optional information. We didn't require anybody to do it. There was language around that because for Dublin, we were bound by GDPR, which is the European data privacy laws. And so there were ways we stored it, and we restricted who had access to our program software, who could see it, but all of the area heads had access, and obviously all the management team.
Practically, whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter who you are or where you are, GDPR will impact you.
Yep. So I have a thing I want to tell you later.
Hey, I got a Wearable Art Club where we've got green card holders from Europe in the club, and it's like, why do we have to GDPR? It's like Merv and Judith.
Yep. So we asked directly the questions we asked for people, and people could opt out, and people who opted out were still put on program. This was not a hard and fast requirement, but we asked about race, ethnicity, age, gender, and sexual orientation on the form when people were applying. And then on the detailed program form where people talked about their interests, another thing we did, we asked if people had access needs in part so that program could accommodate them as necessary. But we also had a text field of your identity are you willing to talk about on program, so that we were making sure we weren't shoehorning our Black authors onto Afrofuturism panels or about to being a POC author if they didn't want to talk about that. And that's really, really important, having ways to get people's consent to talk about those things. There are some times I don't want to talk about being genderqueer on panels, for instance. And so getting my consent before putting me on that on a panel about being a genderqueer fan or whatever is important. And that's why I'm in the camp of people who prefers the people sign up for individual panels or opt-in or consent-based program versus the one where people get set schedules and then they opt out of the things that they don't want. And that's why, because it is more welcoming. I have found it more welcoming to people from underrepresented and marginalized backgrounds to be asked first if they're willing to do this thing, not just assumed. But again, with Dublin, we did the program format of, hey, fill out a questionnaire, we come up with panels, and then you tell us if you don't want to be on them. And we were able to do that by asking them, again, that question that said, hey, what parts of your identity are you comfortable talking about on program? And we looked at that when trying to fill out the LGBTQ focused panels, the POC focused panels, the disability focused panels, and also had a box of what things are you not willing to talk about on panels, which people filled in both with stuff about identities, topics that applied to them that they didn't want to talk about, that didn't apply to them that they didn't want to talk about, and also general topics. There are some people who are authors and costumers who don't want to be on costume panels anymore, so they said that they didn't want to, and therefore not, for example.
I am absolutely 100% behind ask it explicitly. There is a line between in what format you ask that and how long and tedious you make your panelist survey. You want to find a nice balance between this isn't going to take me 2 hours to fill out completely, and yet getting you, the program staff, the information that you need and want to do your job well. I also find that it helps, indeed. I also find that it helps to explain why on earth you're asking in the first place. So if prior to those questions you say, hey, this is totally optional, however, any information you're willing to share with us will help us do our job better, essentially. I love the what are you willing to talk about, what are you not willing to talk about boxes. as well.
Yeah.
It's difficult on the data processing end to organize that nicely so that you can, it depends on how you collect it. But
There's a
you know,
surveying
it's-
panel coming.
sure,
up.
absolutely. And I'm totally going.
Okay.
I'm not sitting on it, but
I'm sitting on it and I have some, and I'm probably going to be bringing a weird perspective again, but yeah, I mean, some of this on the data gathering gets much more, the data gathering turns away from the, okay, I can get numbers out of this and get graphs, to the, okay, well, we've got gushy massaging of people's text. But yeah, having the, if you're someone who you think is a good fit for a panel, and this does make more work for the programming department and does make recruiting more staff for the programming department important, but saying it's like, we've got this panel idea and we think you would be a good fit for this panel idea this intersection here, because I refuse to ever be the person who walks into a panel and says, I don't know why I'm on this panel. I have once done that as a joke, and I did that as a joke because when I was introducing myself as Toastmaster, and it literally was, it's like, why did they, oh, that's why, okay, yes, there's a reason I got recruited for this. But being able to say, it's like, if someone that should all be addressed before the program's even published. But if someone says, I'm not sure why I'm on this panel, to the program team, if you can come back and say, we think that that you have this specific contribution you can make to this panel, are you comfortable with that? Is one way of approaching it. It depends on how you build your program.
It also requires that person to communicate with the program staff in advance about why they're unsure, why they're on the panel, rather than just showing up at the convention and doing what you sent to them as their preliminary schedule. Please provide feedback.
So I'm going to quickly plug a session that's happening tomorrow at 2:30 in whatever room Grenadine says at the time, because it's changed room a couple of times. Ian Stockdale and I, who were part of the program team for Dublin, are giving a talk on communication patterns with program, and we gathered some data from Dublin, and we have some things, so that like segues nicely into this. So that's 2:30 tomorrow in whatever room Grenadine says it's in. So anyways, sorry. I made slides with pie charts.
We had another question before, but I couldn't see because my line of sight. Annie, can you?
I believe they have left the room.
Oh, they've left. Okay.
He was at the back.
Yeah.
We lost him.
Okay.
I think he got sidetracked.
Anybody else have
Happens.
questions though? Sorry, you're
Yeah,
moderator.
I'm totally happy for anybody to ask. It's just the three of us up here.
Anybody?
I mean, yeah, because with in a lot of this is we have spent a lot of time beating this drum and beating the drums that came before it, and sometimes we need someone asking the questions who isn't as embedded in this as we are to remember that, oh, there's something important to talk about, because it's something that was important for us to talk about for personally 5 years ago, and we're past that, but it doesn't mean that everybody's past that.
I mean, I've got another thing that I think is really, like, I can talk about.
I was saying, no one has any questions. I'm gonna say loose.
One thing, so one of the worries with Dublin was Dublin is in Ireland, very, very white country. And there was some worries about how white our program would be. And one of the thing, and the committee from the chair down put in a lot of effort on having underrepresented communities, including POC, involved in the convention at a bunch of different levels. And that was really important. The stuff needs to come from leadership, and it needs to come, and it needs to be thought of holistically. But one of the sort of concrete things that Dublin did, they stole from the, with permission from the Detroit NASFIC, was a fund to the Fantastic Dublin Fund, which provided stipends to people from underrepresented communities. So POC, queer people, I don't remember if anything else, for people who to be on program to help them get there. It was a $400 flat stipend for people who applied. The money mostly did not come from the convention. It came through crowdfunding. And that helped us get several POC panelists that who would not have been able to come to the convention otherwise. And that was huge.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how many people we ended up funding. It was yeah, Sammy wants to look it up. And it was not like gobs and gobs, but in a situation where that we didn't I'm calling them underrepresented communities for a reason. The numbers aren't as high as we would like. So it significantly helped. And without that, there were several panels that we would not have been able to run that were incredibly popular, incredibly well received, and really good items. And so that is a thing that conventions can look at if they really want to make a push to have more diverse panelists, is to look into setting up a fund similarly for your convention. Yes, for the people streaming, Tammy Coxon's in the back of the room, and she helped administer this both for Detroit and for Dublin. And she says she is happy to consult with anybody who wants to set this up.
To tag on that point a little bit, not the funding so much, but the panels we could not have done otherwise statement.
Oh.
This is one of these things. So I am of the camp of we're going to do it well and we're going to do it right, or we're not going to do it at all. I'm not here to litigate the Utah program. I'm sure, and I am happy to talk to anyone individually about things, for example, like how we didn't panel about the good, bad, and ugly history of the railroad. It didn't happen because I couldn't staff it with the people who ought to have been on it. I spent 8 months trying to round up an appropriately diverse and well-informed and inclusive, impactful, and it didn't happen. It didn't matter how much money I had to throw at it, which wasn't a lot, but I had some. I couldn't get people to write me back. I ran into a lot of walls. And this is, I think pulling back from that particular example, just in general, as program people, we need to think about, okay, here are things we would like to do, but let's do them right. Let's not, because I absolutely wasn't going to do that panel with, my BYU history professors who I could have had in droves. But,
and I think one of the reasons that you were impacted on that was that the Chinese American Railway Workers Association was up to their eyeballs doing their own events for the 150th. And this comes back to the you need to understand that you may be recruiting people who are already overcommitted and overburdened and overburnt out, because this is probably not the only place where they're going to be representing a viewpoint associated with their identity.
Indeed, although the CRWDA is the only place where it did have success.
Yeah. So
the head came, he gave a talk on trains and history and science fiction. It was great.
But yeah, so for Worldcon 76, we had a similar fund, and for that we actually, one of the things I realized is we missed. We haven't said one of the big ones, which this reminded me of. It's like a more diverse guest of honor slate is something that, and Nchanter said it starts with leadership, but diversity all the way down starts with leadership, but diversity all the way down also starts with your guest of honor slate, because who your guest of honor slate is going to trigger is well, not just it speaks volumes, it's going to drive a bunch of things. John Picasso did his Mechanics initiative, which he wanted to do, and as artist guest of honor, and also as a absolutely shameless self-marketer.
That's true.
I go out and talk to lots of people about lots of stuff. John, I think, is nonstop on that. But him doing that, even though he's not a Spanish speaker, he could get connections and people that he could get connections and people and help build us program that did involve Spanish-speaking Mexican Americans, and we didn't have as many Mexican science fiction writers and fans come in because of, well, immigration issues. That's still a bit of a euphemism, but because he's John, and because he's been doing this as long as he has, and because he's been deeply connected with the rest of his Mexican American artist community for the last 20 years, even before he started doing science fiction conventions, he got us people like, I mean, we had a screening at Coco that was hosted by and commented by Marcela Devisavilas and some other folks from Pixar, who were the people. It was their job to make sure that Coco was really a Mexican story and not something that got skull paintings on it. So it's your guests of honor, your community leading pros really are going. I mean, they're going to drive things. I mean, we had an LGBT initiative also, which in a normal world, when Kevin wasn't chairing, Kevin and I would have done, but Kevin was chairing, and the chair can't run everything, and had better not run everything, and had better not run a side project inside of the convention, because but Chuck Surface ran with it because he wanted to see it happen, and he saw John's success was something that we could go further with. And maybe we'll do that ourselves some year for some other Worldcon, but yeah, it's your guests of honor can really drive a lot of things, and
I mean, and they
drive your
drive
program.
They drive who's like, for those of us who go to conventions regularly, the draw of the guests of honor can sometimes, it's not something I think about when I go to conventions, but for a lot of people who go to cons occasionally, that is what makes the decision for them. And that is a way to get new attendees in. And so if you have authors or artists or fan guests or whatever that are either POC themselves and or having fan base, if what you're looking to do is get more POC, if you're looking to get more queer people like substitute in here, that is a thing. And also their friends who are also panelists will sometimes show up. I know that that's been the case at Aresia, where we'll have some occasional panelists who come when it's their friends who are guests of honor who are also POC.
Yeah, I mean, it's for our WesterCon. Now, mind you, our WesterCon was its own special thing, but for our WesterCon, because we were already upsetting the apple cart on WesterCon, we weren't in the position to upset the WesterCon So White apple cart too much, but we had author guests of honor, first lesbian married couple author guests, first same-sex married couple author guests of honor, or WesterCon guests of honor, where they were married. We had a gay comic book artist and his husband, who runs a small publishing company, artist guest of honor, and small press guest of honor. And then, of course, the thing that upset the apple cart even more than that was our fan guests of honor. Well, we decided we would look back at so fan guests of honor, everybody in this room knows this if they've had to select fan guests of honor or have paid attention to how other conventions select fan guests of honor. Convention runners often select other convention runners to be their fan guests of honor because that's who they know. And we looked at things and said, well, back when dirt was new, we should have talked about this at the traditions panel. Back when dirt was new, you selected fan guests of honor because they were fanzine writers, because you read their fanzine and they lived halfway across the continent and travel was expensive, and you brought them over so you could meet them and have a beer. we decided to get a trio of Canadian podcasters to come in to be our fan guests of honor because anything that will infuriate a small number of very, very vocal fanzine fans and thrill a bunch more. In a lot of ways, podcasts are the new fanzine. They're the same kind of thing in a new media. So thinking in terms of, sometimes you want to think in terms of okay, do we need to upset the apple cart here a little bit? And with regards to getting a more diverse panel, panelist pool, a more diverse guests of honor pool, you have to be ready to upset the apple cart and know that you're going to get a bit of flack for going outside of something traditional or not being traditional enough. So, microphone, please.
I was getting up.
So the suggestions you've given are great. And I realize this is technically a panel more on programming, but the place where things I hear a lot of frustration, I guess, are people about how do you recruit folks in to help run the conventions. Which I know it's not the panelist thing, but
It
everything
totally is.
it becomes
totally
very
is.
circular, right? So it's like if so you can have guests of honor and then maybe you'll get more panelists, but if they look and they say that your concom's all white, maybe they're not going to want to come and be panelists, but how do you get them on the and so I hear a lot of people kind of go round and round and round and round on that, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about recruit, people of color, LGBT, whatever category, pick it, onto your concom.
You're not wrong about it all being circular.
Some of the way to do that is to recruit them onto panelists onto program staff. That is a way. That is a gateway a thing. If you happen to be doing well on the diversity on your program, you will naturally have a larger diversity, almost naturally, diversity in your attendee base. And at some point, those people, if they want to see it continue, are likely to help. Also, but back to the sort of outreach thing, making, we often say as con runners, con running is horse trading. And so there is a level of, oh, I'll go work on your con and you come and work on mine. So if you support and help POC run events, at some point there will naturally hope if you're doing it well in a non-condescending white savior manner, you will develop relationships with people who then want to come back and help you too. And no, there is not a magic bullet answer here, because this is not, if there was a magic bullet answer here, we would have done it and this would not be a panel anybody would have any reason to attend.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and read the question that came in from chat, because this is exactly how I feel about the recruitment topic. It says, is there a difference between world cons and local cons? At WorldCon, you have more varied combinations of cultural identity and the cultures they've lived in. That's true. I also think it can be more difficult to achieve the long game relationship if you're a WorldCon.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the long game of bidding. I mean, it's not local con who's been here and hopefully will still be here in 20 years. It's,
So I think
as for local, it's your locality.
Yeah, so it's a different beast, obviously, but people aren't running world cons in a vacuum. People who run world cons generally started or have connections to local con running. There are some people who only do world cons, but they are a minority. And so it is and my experiences with working on WorldCon is you do draw from your local base. Even if so when I was running the incident response team in Kansas City in 2016, most of a lot of my staff were people who came from a region and were thinking about coming to Mid-Americon, but came because I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing. And they were like, this sounds awesome. my friends are weird. Like, yes, we'll come and do it too. So it is, if, you know, and some of it also for Worldcon is, yeah, you are, I mean, doing con running and finding staff is a lot about networking. If you individually as a person are not great at it, but you're great at the technical parts of running your division or your area, then you want to try and find a deputy who's better at that than you. And like, yes, that there's a little bit of catch there, but that's the answer I have.
I mean, on the local side of things, I mean, I can look at where I am now in San Jose, and the San Jose convention, the San Jose General Science Fiction conventions actually draw pretty well with the Mexican American community, which is a huge chunk of our community. We draw well with the East Asian American community, which is a huge community. Where we don't really draw that well, but I know there are a ton of science fiction fans because I know how geeky many of these people are when I work with them. We don't actually do that well drawing from the South Asian Indian communities, and I don't know why yet. But knowing so many of these people that I work with, and it's I'm not quite sure what we're doing wrong or what we're not doing to make conventions more engaging to them. I mean, it is your locality. I mean, if I was running a small convention in Wausau, Wisconsin, I probably would not have, even if I had the best outreach programs, I would probably not reach a lot of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on your locality. And really, I mean, that is, if you're running a local or a regional, you're running that convention for your local community, your regional community. And the question is, how well are you representing your local or regional community? And that's going to be a different, and the answers on that are going to be different from convention to convention and region to region. So.
Okie dokie. Yep, we are out of time.
5 minutes to be upstairs.
Thanks so much, everybody.
That I'm happy with. Can someone